Everybody knows the deadliest man in the Old West was the gunfighter. Quick draw, high noon, a body in the dirt. Everybody's wrong. Out on the real frontier, the gunfight was about the safest thing going. The jobs that actually killed people were the ones Hollywood never put in a movie. Because there's nothing exciting about a man dying slowly for a wage somebody already decided he was worth. So we're counting down the 9 deadliest ways to earn a living in the Old West, from bad to worst. The famous gunfighter doesn't even make the list. Number 9, the stagecoach driver. A good driver made $100 to $150 a month, serious money in the 1870s, and nobody pays that for an easy job. Ask what killed stagecoach drivers and everyone says robbers. And sure, there were robbers. Wells Fargo's own detective counted 347 holdups between 1870 and 1884. The most famous of them, Black Bart, robbed 28 coaches with a shotgun he never once loaded and left little handwritten poems in the empty strongbox. A robber too polite to risk hurting anyone, and the public adored him for it. But the robbers are a distraction. What actually killed the man holding the reins wasn't hiding behind a rock. It was the road. A 6-horse team panicking on a mountain grade in the dark. A front wheel catching the edge of a canyon at full speed, and the whole coach going over with it. The company could buy insurance against Black Bart. Against the cliff, it just handed the driver the reins and wished him luck. Number 8, the Brothel Worker. This one I'll play straight because there's nothing funny in it. A woman in a crib, a single room barely big enough to turn around in, took men at 25 cents each, 15 or 20 a day. Sounds like a living until you see the rent. The house charged her $8 to $15 a week for that room, owed whether a customer showed up or not. So she started most weeks already in debt, and the debt only grew. That wasn't bad luck. That was the business plan. What killed these women was the trap itself, and what it drove them to. The laudanum to get through the day. The backroom procedures with no doctor and nothing clean. In Deadwood's red light district, the doctors eventually stopped even asking why they'd been called out at night. They just showed up with a stomach pump, because the answer was almost always the same. Most of these women never saw 30. Number 7, the lumberjack. By 1890, Washington alone was cutting more than 1 billion board feet of timber a year, almost all of it by hand, for $26 to $40 a month and a bunk in a freezing cabin. One logging company in 1894 described the danger in a single flat sentence: falling trees and rolling logs have caused a long list of deaths, and then moved on to the next topic because a dead logger was a line in a ledger, not news. But the falling trees weren't even the worst part. The worst part was the river drive. To move the cut logs to the mill, men rode them down fast water, jumping from one rolling, half-sunk log to the next with an iron-tipped pole, breaking up the jams before they locked. Lose your footing and you went under the timber, and the timber didn't move for you. Neither did the drive. Stopping cost money, and the man was already paid for. Number 6, the buffalo skinner. The pay was 25 cents a hide. Out on the southern plains in August, a buffalo carcass left a day or two in the heat swells up with gas and seals tight like a drum. When the skinner cuts it open, it bursts. A face full of hydrogen sulfide and methane straight into the lungs, sometimes enough to drop him where he kneels. He spent all day cutting into days-old rot with his bare hands, breathing whatever came out of it. Nobody wanted these men around. Towns turned them away at the edge just for the smell. And nobody ever kept a death count for the job because it didn't kill in a way anyone bothered to write down. It just took the lungs slowly for a quarter a hide. Then the trade did the one decent thing on this whole list: it ran out of buffalo. By 1884, the great southern herd was commercially extinct, and the job ended, not out of mercy, but because there was nothing left to skin. Number 5, the Cattle-Drive Cowboy. Nobody in American history got a better publicist than the cowboy, and almost none of it was true. The pay was $25 to $40 a month, and when a cowboy died on the job, it wasn't in a quick-draw duel at sundown. It was uglier and a lot dumber. He drowned pushing panicked cattle across a flooded river, or got hit by lightning standing in open country as the tallest thing for a mile, or went under 3,000 head when something spooked them in the dark, or broke a leg 500 miles from the nearest doctor, which in 1880 killed you just as dead, only slower. And we know almost exactly what 20 years of that bought, because a trail hand named G.D. Burroughs rode the drives for 2 decades and then added up everything he owned at the end, $480 worth of other clothes. The cowboy got the songs, the movies, and the statue in the town square. The man who owned the cattle got the money. Number 4, the Frontier Lawman. Here's where the legend and the record finally agree on something. The deputy U.S. Marshals who rode for Judge Isaac Parker out of Fort Smith worked the most dangerous ground in the country, Indian Territory, for about $2 an arrest. No salary, no pension, no backup for a couple hundred miles. Parker sat on that bench for 21 years and sentenced 160 men to hang, and he buried a long line of his own deputies doing it. By some counts, more than 65 of them killed in the field. So yes, the job was genuinely deadly, but look at who walked away from it. The most famous lawman the West ever produced, the one Hollywood put on screen more than anyone else, was Wyatt Earp. And Earp died in bed in Los Angeles in 1929, 80 years old, of nothing more exciting than old age. The danger was real. The fame went to the man who got out alive. It usually does. Number 3, the coal miner. $150 to $250 a day to go underground and meet the 3 ways a coal mine kills you: gas explosions, cave-ins, and black damp. The dead air that collects at the bottom of a mine with no color and no smell, the oxygen quietly gone. So a man sits down to rest and never stands up. And for anyone those 3 missed, there was the dust settling into the lungs year after year, black lung, or as the miners called it, just the cough. And here's where it stops being grim stories and gets colder, because somebody kept count. From 1890 to 1894, coal miners died at a documented rate of 2.52 per 1,000 men every year, a government number, climbing toward 3.53 by the early 1900s. The death rate was measured. It was printed in a report. The company knew it, the government knew it, the miner knew it well enough, and the mines opened every morning anyway, because that number was low enough to live with. That's the one thing a gunfight could never be. Industrial death isn't an accident, it's a budget. Number 2, the hard rock miner. The silver miners on Nevada's Comstock lode made $3 to $4 a day, some of the best mining wages in the country, and once again, the high pay is the warning. The rock down deep ran past 110 degrees before anyone lit a fuse. The walls caved with no warning until an engineer named Philip Deidesheimer worked out square-set timbering in 1860 and bought the men a little room. And when the rock didn't crush them or cook them, the dust did. Hard rock miners in Butte, Montana, died of tuberculosis at 10 times the national rate. And then there were the nights the mountain took men all at once. On April 7, 1869, a fire broke out 800 feet down in the Yellow Jacket mine. To smother it, they sealed the shafts with men still inside. And when it was finally over, at least 35 were dead in the dark. One of them was Anthony Toy, 25 years old, married 20 days. The rock stayed too hot to go back in for 3 years. And then the owners reopened the mine and sent the next shift down because the silver was still in there. Number 1, the railroad man. Start with what it cost just to build. The Central Pacific pushed its line east out of Sacramento using 10,000 to 12,000 Chinese workers, paid $26 to $35 a month, and somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 of them died doing it. The company never kept a full count. The records were left vague on purpose. The Transcontinental Railroad was finished on May 10, 1869, in a famous photo full of men raising bottles to the camera. The men who died building it weren't in the picture, and then it opened, and running the railroad turned out to be even deadlier than building it. Before the automatic coupler, the only way to join two cars was for a brakeman to step into the gap between them and drop a steel pin into the link by hand while the cars rolled together, tons of moving iron closing on his hands, dozens of times a shift. The injury was so common it had a name, brakeman's hand. A railroad doctor could pick a brakeman out across a room just by counting his fingers. In 1889, 1 in every 117 railroad trainmen was killed on the job, and 1 in 35 was hurt. And here's the part that makes it worse. The fix already existed. The automatic coupler had been invented, patented, and was sitting there ready. It just wasn't made law until 1893, which meant 4 more years of men feeding their hands into that gap, because the pin was cheaper than the coupler, and the men were cheaper than both. So here's how backwards the whole legend is. A historian named Robert Dykstra once counted every documented killing in Dodge City, the most notorious gun town in the entire mythology of the West, across a full 10 years, 1876 to 1885. The total was 15, not 15 a year, 15 in a decade. The most famous gunfight in American history, the shootout at the OK Corral, killed 3 men in the whole event. The West didn't take its men at high noon in a fair fight. It took them on the night shift, in the gap between 2 cars, 1,000 feet underground breathing rock dust, quietly, for a wage that already had the cost of their death built into it. The gunfight got the movies for one simple reason. Out of everything that killed a man out there, it was the only death that looked like a fair fight. Anthony Toy was 25 years old and married 20 days when the Yellow Jacket took him. He wasn't the unlucky exception to the Old West. He was the plan. And the men who built that West wrote it right into the wages and counted on you never adding it up. If that's the kind of history you want more of, the real story underneath the one everybody thinks they know, subscribe and stick around.